Right now on Upfront.
Split Ticket.
The day the American people regained control of their country.
President-elect Donald Trump. Senator Tammy Baldwin reelected.
I recognize that the people of Wisconsin chose Donald Trump, and I respect their choice.
Wisconsin, the tipping point. Trump's historic win and now the impact.
The outcome of this election is not what we wanted, not what we fought for.
What happened? Behind the scenes, our exclusives this Sunday. Former Trump Chief of Staff and Wisconsin native Reince Priebus.
Dragging with him new senators, probably will keep the House of Representatives.
Democratic Party of Wisconsin Chairman Ben Wickler.
And in Wisconsin, the essential battleground state, the land of the nail-biter.
Then the analysis, where both parties go from here. Republican strategist Bill McCoshen, Democrat Joe Zepecki. It all starts right now.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. President-elect Donald Trump and his transition team quickly moving toward January, already naming his campaign manager, Susie Wiles, as White House Chief of Staff. Trump winning in Wisconsin by some 29,000 votes, the smallest margin of the key battlegrounds, but a resounding victory nationwide. Senator Tammy Baldwin reelected to a third term.
President Biden and Vice President Harris promising a peaceful transfer of power. The attention now turns to the impact, a split vote in Wisconsin and a bitter divide politically ahead of January. Reince Priebus is the former chief of staff during the Trump administration, the former chair of the Republican National Committee and state party here in Wisconsin. He joins us now. Hey, Reince, great to see you.
Hey, it's great to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Let's first start with Tuesday night. Were you surprised at all by the scope of Trump's victory when you look at the swing states? What stuck out to you here in Wisconsin?
Well, first of all, I wasn't surprised that the president got over 300 electoral votes. I thought he'd win all the swing states, and I also thought that he would win the three blue wall states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, basically because that undecided voter that is in those three states, it's the same person. It's the same data. That's why Joe Biden won them all in 2020. Donald Trump won them all in 2016. And so I wasn't surprised at all.
Reince, there were several things that happened in the days leading up to this election that could have really derailed any typical campaign, from the racist comments that the comedian made at the Madison Square Garden rally to Trump even suggesting that maybe he shouldn't have left the White House. Why didn't those things have an impact on the race that maybe Democrats thought that they could have had?
Because people aren't stupid. They know that this comedian at Madison Square Garden was foolish for making such comments, that it wasn't Donald Trump making the comments. And by the way, if you look at Osceola County, which is one of the most Puerto Rican counties in Florida, go look at it. It's just south of Orlando. Donald Trump won that county. Now, Joe Biden won it easily in 2020. Donald Trump won it. So look, I think people aren't dumb, okay? They know what the truth is and what it's not. And it turns out that a lot of these people go to the grocery store and buy groceries, and it turns out that a lot of these people put gas in their car. So these things matter to people.
Reince, the transition team moving fast and furious. Trump already naming Susie Wiles her chief of staff. You held that post at one point. What is Susie in for?
Well, I mean, it's a tough job. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump's a force in nature, but Susie's up to it. I mean, I think she's a great pick for this job. I think it's a little different, too. I mean, Donald Trump's been through it already. I mean, we put together a team in 2016 really quickly. It was sort of like a team of rivals, which is kind of a complicated thing to do. I think that having Susie named singularly as chief of staff, hopefully she will pick most of the staff that she wants to work with, obviously in consultation with the president. And that is very different than what I stepped into. But I'm very happy for her. I think the president made a wise decision, and she's going to be great.
Does this give any indication what the administration and what his cabinet will look like?
Probably not. I mean, I think that Donald Trump is going to have a huge, he's going to be very involved in that. And I think that Susie will help guide the process. But those are Donald Trump's decisions. And unlike 2016, they're just they're a little bit further along than we were. And I think that those decisions are going to be rolling out very, very quickly.
Any role for you in the new administration?
Oh, well, I'll be involved in things here and there, but I've got a good life, outside of the White House, and I'm happy with what I'm doing. But I'm also, I'm always involved, but, I kind of get involved, but I don't get, too much in the matrix, you could say. I try to keep a balance.
Reince, Democrats are pointing to things that President-elect Trump has said on the campaign trail, including immediate mass deportations. They paint this picture of police, threats of police going door to door. RFK Jr. stands on vaccines as well. What will the first 100 days of this second Trump administration look like?
Well, I think it's going to be a little bit more orderly. I think they know exactly what they want to get done on energy and the border. I think they're going to start with immediately shutting down that border, getting getting the drilling going again, the leases going again, getting gas prices down. They've got the 2025 tax cuts that they need to renew, which is going to take up almost the entire legislative process. At least they'll probably start that in the House, and then they've got confirmations in the Senate. So, and as far as the deportations, look, one thing that you can count on is Donald Trump is going to follow through on these promises. And the other thing is, I hope people aren't going to be surprised by this, right? This was a central theme of Donald Trump's campaign. Everyone heard it, and people all over the country, from New York down to California, voted, and they all shifted, at least a large percentage of the population shifted to Donald Trump. He has a mandate to do the things that he promised to do.
Reince Priebus, former chief of staff during the first Trump administration, former chair of the RNC. Hey, Reince, thanks so much, like always.
Thank you.
Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin in her acceptance speech saying she'll work with President-elect Trump when policies benefit Wisconsin, adding she respects the choice of Wisconsin voters. Baldwin outperformed Kamala Harris across the state. Democrats this weekend not only pointing fingers, but grappling with their loss. And with that, let's bring in Ben Wickler. He's the chairman of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, and he joins us now. Ben, welcome back to Upfront.
Thanks so much for having me back.
We've got a lot to talk about. Let's start with the presidential race. What went wrong in Wisconsin?
Well, what went wrong in Wisconsin was less than what went wrong just about everywhere else. There was a national shift of about 6 percentage points towards Trump. Wisconsin had the smallest shift of any of the battleground states. It was a shift of 1.5 percentage points. So I think you have to look at the big picture. And the big picture is nationwide and in Wisconsin and around every other developed country that's had an election this year. I think people were most of all frustrated about prices and inflation and took that out against the incumbent parties, whether they were on the left or on the right. Now, that said, clearly we came up short, and we've got to figure out how to reach more voters in more places, people that maybe we aren't talking to yet. Because even though Kamala Harris got more votes in Wisconsin than President Biden did in 2020, Trump got even more than that. And we need to make the case to those voters that Democrats have more to offer to make their lives better.
And to that point, Bernie Sanders, as I'm sure you saw, came out and said this past week, it should come as no great surprise that the Democratic Party, which has abandoned working class people, would find that the working class has abandoned them. Is that a fair point he's making?
I have great respect for Senator Sanders. I do not think the Democratic Party has abandoned working people. We have fought for working people, and we've fought against a Republican Party that's controlled by the most right-wing, extreme billionaire special interests in the country and in the world. The world's richest man, Elon Musk, poured hundreds of millions of dollars into supporting Donald Trump. He, I'm sure, expects to reap tens of billions of dollars in reward. And we have to keep on fighting.
Should the vice president have gone on Joe Rogan?
I think if you look at the big picture, showing up in more places for years would have absolutely made a difference. The question of would that have flipped an election that shifted 6 points to the right? Hard to say that. You would have had to get 125,000 people to switch from Trump to Harris across the blue wall states. I think going forward, Democrats should find ways to show up and speak to voters where they are, where they're getting information, and build new ways to get information out to people and to connect with them at a level that resonates with them. Across the board. I think that's a key part of the challenge and the opportunity for Democrats going into 26 and 28.
Trump improved in all but 4 counties from 2020. The margin of victory in Hispanic wards dropped 10 points from 2020. Democrats were the strongest in the poorest and richest 20% of wards. You say that Democrats need to move forward, reaching people where they are. But what does this data say about the results in the state of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin?
Well, I think the big takeaway from that is that we have to be everywhere. I mean, I'm thrilled that we added vote share in the WOW counties and in Door County. Those are the 4. You know, when you look at the types of geographies, nationwide we lost by 8 points in major urban core counties. In Milwaukee County, we lost just 1 point. In suburbs nationwide, we lost about 5.7 points. Here we gained 1/10 of 1 point. In smaller kind of mid-sized metros across the country, I believe it was a 5-point loss. In Wisconsin, we shifted about 1 point. And in rural counties nationally, we lost 4 points. In Wisconsin, we lost 2 points. Now, those are losses, and the goal for Democrats is gains. The fact that we were able to stem the tide to some extent, I think, is a reflection of the year-round organizing that we do at the Democratic Party and that our allies and partners have done in this state. We were running against the wind, even though we felt the wind at our backs. I think we didn't realize quite how much we were up against. But my goal is to double and triple down on year-round statewide organizing. I think it's critical, and to figure out new ways and new places to communicate, because it's clear that there are a lot of folks who, whether they heard it, it didn't land. That Democrats had a plan to bring their prices down, to fight for them, fight for working folks all over the state.
Ben Wickler, chairman of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. Ben, hey, like always, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Up next, how it happened inside the campaigns. Republican strategist Bill McCoshen, Democrat Joe Zepecki with us together next.